on the 5th of June 2017. The countries named Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and Egypt immediately cut off their diplomatic ties with Qatar due to their alleged support for terrorism and good stable relationship with Iran, Hamas, and Muslim Brotherhood group. The consequences of the severed ties were withdrawals of ambassadors and implementing trade and travel bans. There had been a shortage on food supplies and the economy's profit was unstable. Doha was faced with two options for resolving the crisis. It could either completely concede to the demands of the other countries or live in isolation. However, Qatar had refused to comply with an initial list saying that they would not agree to any measures that threatened its sovereignty or violated international law. Countries such as Oman and Kuwait tried to mediate and work through the problems to find solutions, but Qatar refused to agree. The powerful nation USA had also stepped into the issue as a mediator, but Qatar was adamant on its decision and claimed that they are not in support of terrorism. Therefore, the country's efforts had failed.
Western countries encouraged the Arab countries to shift into dictatorship. The wave of Arab Spring protests started from Egypt, removing their president from power and spread to countries including Syria. The Arab Spring protests were started to remove their country's president from power and build democracy. Syria fought against President Bashar al-Assad, but he is still in power by developing chemical weapons against his own country people. Countries such as Russia and Hezbollah have been supporting the president, but there are many rebel forces against this. Number of peace initiatives were taken. Recently, the Geneva peace talks in March 2017, led by United Nations, also proposed for peace, but the war still continues. Iraq had faced many wars, but one of the recent wars was the US-Iraq. Under the control of Saddam Hussein, Iraq has walked into Kuwait to take away their oil fields. The other countries had taken a strong view on this, and US President George W. Bush in 2003 planned for the invasion of Iraq due to reported threats of weapons of mass destruction. Following this, Saddam Hussein's death occurred and US took over the Iraqi government in May 2003. The government was trained by the US forces and eventually the government was given back to Iraq. After this, the ISIS had emerged and an international coalition took place. Led by this, a civil war started involving the Iraqi National Army, Kurdish forces, Sunni tribesmen, and Shia militia. They each fought for a region in Iraq. Lately, the ISIS fought for the region Mosul but failed. The Iraqi government forces retook Mosul, making a turning point in the conflict. The first peace attempt was made by US. They had asked Saddam Hussein to stop the chemical weapons and sites he was developing, but it didn't take place. Now, after the Iraqi government retook Mosul, peace attempts are going on to satisfy the population and convince the other internal parties to join their side.
The Afghanistan War began in 2001. US believed that an alleged terrorist group called Al-Qaeda were responsible for the 9/11 attack. The Taliban, the ruling Afghan leaders at the time, were pressured to give up Osama bin Laden but failed to do so. This made both the Taliban and Al-Qaeda US's target. US now had the goal to remove the Taliban from power and has support from other powerful nations such as United Kingdom, Canada, and an alliance with the Afghan Northern Alliance. Taliban's rule ended on 7th of December 2001, and a new president was elected in 2004. The Taliban tried to regain power by suicide attacks and bombing, and many of the NATO troop members' lives were lost. The NATO troops began to withdraw from Afghanistan in 2011 and pledged to reduce military presence. Osama bin Laden was killed on 2nd of May 2011 by the US Navy SEAL, but Al-Qaeda swore to avenge his death.
The Yemeni Civil War is a conflict that first began in 2015 between two organizations claiming to be a part of the Yemeni government along with their fellow supporters. Yemen, one of the Arab world's most poverty-stricken countries, has been appalled by the war that erupted between the forces that are loyal to the government of President Hadi and those who follow the Houthi rebel movement. More than 49,000 people have been killed and injured ever since the feud began. Majority of the airstrikes have been fired by a Saudi-led multinational coalition that are allies with the president. The conflict implemented by the coalition have also provoked a humanitarian disaster, leaving a wholesome amount of the population in need of aid. There have been several recommended solutions put forward as peace attempts, but none of them have prevailed. One of them is to President Hadi and the Yemeni government, and it's to de-escalate the conflict compromise by refraining from calling for the military liberation of Sana'a and some other cities, facilitating unhindered humanitarian and commercial access to all parts of Yemen, including the Houthi-controlled areas, and recognizing publicly the need for political reconciliation and revive the Yemeni political process.
It depends all on the world leaders. If they're good and if they want to cooperate with each other, then I think peace can be made. And we've seen now countries have come closer with things like United Nations and stuff like that. So yeah, I guess it can. No, I don't believe so because currently countries and world leaders aren't able to agree on many aspects.
No, I do not think that peace can be obtained in the future. And why I think that is because in today's world, in the 21st century, everyone wants power. They all desire power because that means they get the recognition that they want from the world. And these days, there's no one who wants to settle for anything less than the best, which means that people are going to fight over their opinions until theirs is chosen, meaning that they will never reach a compromise or a settlement in between, which will not show any peace or any kind of union in between people. I believe that it can only be solved if people start to think from other perspectives and think in shoes of another person so that they can understand what the problem is, solve it together, which I don't think will be obtained any time in the future.
I sure do hope so that peace can be obtained in the future, but it all solely depends on the actions we take now, whether we really want to have peace in the future, limit the conflicts that happen within society, diversify and accept everyone else. Yes, I do think that peace can be obtained in the future.
Yeah, I think so.
I mean, not in the near future, but I believe in the long run it eventually will be, because we are already putting in actions in how to achieve peace and teaching our children how to be more accepting of each other and more tolerant.
I guess yes, it will be obtained in the future.
No.
Yes.
Relationship issues at home with your family. Probably power greedy people. Lack of education maybe.
I think that probably lack of education.
I feel that maybe difference in opinions and ignorance can cause conflict, because people want to have their rights, but some people are ignorant to the fact that these people are not obtaining their rights, and the difference in opinions. People have a lot of arguments due to that, and I feel that that's the main cause for problems and conflicts.
I think it's mostly that people can negotiate on one term, and it's basically because of the selfishness of human and the greed that ends up in conflict, that ends up causing wars, problems, and just ultimately stops peace.
The main cause for conflict is that there is no basic mutual understanding between nations. If people had better communication and can say what they wanted and negotiate better, I do feel that peace can be obtained without the need of war or any other conflicts.
I feel the main cause of conflict is various interest diversification when there's no consensus in society. It would be conflicting ideologies and power relations, because every country wants to dominate the world, both politically and economically, so they want to thrive, and because of that there'll be conflicts. Yeah, that's the reason why there will be conflicts.
Corrupt politicians.
Basically, the young people, yes, all over the world, mainly because of there is so much of distrust around. There is so much of unhappiness among the people. Could be their low wages, could it be the government policies which are against their welfare, could it be their the political conditions of that country concerned, then lack of day-to-day comforts of living that these people have, and then some of them are also brainwashed in the name of religion also. So brainwashing happens, and why people get influenced because of these things is not because they have an ardent devotion towards their religion or things like that. It's mainly because of the fact that they lack many things that is necessary to give them a decent living, and the easiest way they could get a gratification is by going through a wrong way, and they think that when they take to terrorism and do arson and looting and killing, somehow or the other they get that satisfaction that what they are doing is the right thing, and somehow they find a meaning in life even if there is no meaning.
How are the youngsters obtaining arms and ammunition of sophisticated equipments if all countries are resolved to stop conflicts, wars, terrorism?
Okay, that again is quite a question that is for the governments to actually, when they introspect themselves, they know very well that many of the famous countries in the world sustain mainly because of their arms industries, and that's the way the countries sustain. And very often what they do is, it's quite a partialized world in which many of the countries don't want to show what their true face is, and though on one side they talk about disarmament, and we know very openly that some of the world's superpowers have so much of arms and ammunitions which is uncontrolled, that finally they export it to the poor countries of the world, and these poor countries are the ones which does not have government, which does not have employment opportunities, which is facing all kind of global environmental issues also. And because of the distrust that the youngsters have, they take an easy way out in the form of arms and ammunitions, and in turn they go against their own governments.
How are the youngsters obtaining arms and ammunition of sophisticated equipments if all countries are resolved to stop conflicts, wars, terrorism?
Okay, that again is quite a question that is for the governments to actually, when they introspect themselves, they know very well that many of the famous countries in the world sustain mainly because of their arms industries, and that's the way the countries sustain. And very often what they do is, it's quite a partialized world in which many of the countries don't want to show what their true face is, and though on one side they talk about disarmament, and we know very openly that some of the world's superpowers have so much of arms and ammunitions which is uncontrolled, that finally they export it to the poor countries of the world, and these poor countries are the ones which does not have government, which does not have employment opportunities, which is facing all kind of global environmental issues also. And because of the distrust that the youngsters have, they take an easy way out in the form of arms and ammunitions, and in turn they go against their own governments. For this to happen, first of all, there is democracy across the world. if you take an average of the democratic countries of the world and the number of people who actually go to vote in their countries, it's hardly, no country has more than 60% of population voting. And as long as people are indifferent and each one of them are going to think that they are not bothered about what the government does, or the government is, they are more critical rather than being proactive and doing their responsibility as responsible citizens by thinking as to who they are going to vote and being informed citizens. As long as people don't take that initiative, you're going to have correct politicians who are going to lead the countries around the world. You're going to have people who have their own hidden agendas to rule over the world. And as long as the elite or the educated crowd in almost all the countries of the world realize this folly and take upon the ownership of responsibility towards the society in general, we're going to face this situation. There has to be a dialogue like in ancient days, not even ancient days, like in the 18th and the 19th centuries, there used to be international dialogues on religion. There used to be dialogues on culture. There used to be dialogues on political setup and democracy. But you don't see that happening today. Today everybody, we were thinking that religion actually unifies people. But unfortunately, the way the people have made the situation is we think that religion is something that has to segregate people rather than unify. So technically, every government, every person who is responsible enough does not consider himself or herself responsible enough to tell the people about what essentially is the essence of unification, about what is religion, what is culture. As long as that doesn't happen, we are bound to face this situation. So it's time that people awaken, the educated people awaken. There is a purpose, there is a sense of, existence. Because at the end of the day, how long can you kill and destroy? And then do what?
Few years back,
if you're going to say if it is only the Middle East, we also know that if you look into the history of this region, basically, geographically this region is not so gifted. But the way people have worked hard because of their natural resources, every country, including UAE, has come up through a very hard struggle. And if you look into the other countries, such as, like the problems with Syria, problem with Egypt, and problem with all those countries, wherever these sort of problems are happening, Libya, all those things is mainly because we choose the wrong leaders. If only people realize that how important it is democracy, choosing the right leadership, even if it is not the right leadership, like for example in the instance of UAE, you have a visionary leader. When the leadership is good, things fall in line. No matter how much the people want and how much ever resources you may have. Like for example, most of the African countries are naturally gifted. But they don't have a good leader to lead them. So unless you have some kind of a visionary leadership, this problem is bound to happen. So it's very important that democracy or whatever form of government, people choose to have the right leader